Listen. Do you hear that? That's the sound of 2,000 people screaming in total silence. They call it the year the North broke. I arrived for a warm fire, but I found a graveyard of standing cabins and open tombs. My name is Joe LaBelle, and what I found at Lake Anjakuni, science still can't explain, and the ice refuses to tell. They say the Arctic doesn't just freeze your blood, it freezes time. It's a place where the wind has 1,000 voices, and if you listen long enough, you might start to believe they're talking to you. I've spent the better part of my life hunting the white silence of the North. I thought I knew every shadow on the tundra, every crack of the ice, and every mood of the wind. But November 1930, that was the year the silence changed. It didn't feel like peace anymore. It felt like a hell breathless suffocating. Heavy presence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up before. I even saw the first cabin. I was pushing through a blizzard that felt like needles against my skin. I was heading for the village at Lake Anjakuni. I had been there many times before. It was a bustling community, 2,000 people, mostly Inuit, who knew how to survive in a land that wanted them dead. Usually, you could hear the village long before you saw it. The howling of the sled dogs, the laughter of children, the rhythmic thud of wood being chopped. But that night, there was only the wind, and it was screaming. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from the climb, but from the wrongness of it all. The village lay below me like a graveyard. No smoke rose from a single chimney, not one in the Arctic. A fire is life. If the fires go out, it means something has gone terribly wrong. My rifle gripped tight in my gloved hands. I expected a dog to bark, a guard to call out, or a curious child to peek through a tent flap. Nothing. The kayaks were still pulled up on the shore, encased in a thick, crystalline layer of ice. The sleds were lined up, their leather harnesses whipping back and forth in the wind like ghost limbs. I walked into the center of the village and shouted, "Hello, is anyone there?" My voice didn't echo. It just died. The wind swallowed it whole. I stood there, a lone man, in a village of 2,000, feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. The silence wasn't just an absence of noise, it was a physical weight. It felt as if the entire population had simply stepped out of reality, leaving the world behind them. I entered the first shack. It was the home of a family I knew well. The caribou skin flap was tied back, inviting the bitter cold inside. I stepped over the threshold and my eyes took a moment to adjust to the gloom. On the hearth sat a large iron pot. I touched it, it was ice cold. Inside was a caribou stew, frozen into a solid gray block. There were bowls laid out on the table, spoons resting in them. It wasn't that they had fled. When people flee, they take their blankets, their knives, their food. But here, everything was in its place. I moved to the next cabin. On a wooden bench lay a half-sewn shirt. A bone needle was still threaded through the tough deerskin parka, caught mid-stitch. It looked as if the woman sewing it had been called away for a fleeting secanda. Knock at the door. A sound outside and had simply never returned to finish her work. I went from house to house, tent to tent. In every single one, the story was the same. A pipe filled with tobacco sitting on a shelf. A child's toy carved from bone lying on the floor. Everything pointed to a life interrupted in a single heartbeat. 2,000 soulsmen who had faced polar bears, women who had raised families in the harshest storms, elders who carried the wisdom of centuries all gone. Not a single footprint led out of the village. The snow around the cabins was smooth, windswept, and undisturbed. The deeper I went into the village, the more the horror began to sink its teeth into me. I found the dogs. My God. The dogs. They were the lifeblood of the Inuit. Without them, you are a dead man walking. I found 7 of them, still tied to their pickets. They hadn't been killed by a predator or a man. They had starved to death. They were curled in pathetic, frozen circles, covered in a thin veil of white frost. Why hadn't they been fed? Why hadn't they been untied? An Inuit would die before letting his dogs starve like that. It meant that whatever had taken the people had happened so fast, or was so terrifying, that no one even thought to release the animals. But the worst was yet to come. I walked toward the burial ground on the outskirts of the village. The Inuit hold their ancestors in the highest sacred regard. But when I reached the stone cairns, I fell to my knees. The ancient graves had been torn open. Huge stones that would take 3 men to move had been tossed aside like pebbles. And the graves, they were empty. The bodies were gone. Whoever or whatever had cleared out the living had come back for the dead. It defied every law of nature I knew. Animals don't exhume bodies, and men don't rob graves in a blizzard. I didn't stay long. After that, I couldn't. I fled that village as if the devil himself was at my heels. I made it to the nearest telegraph office, my mind frayed and my body broken. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Mounties, didn't believe me at first. But when they arrived at Anjakuni, they found exactly what I had seen. Or rather, what I hadn't seen. They searched for weeks. They combed every inch of that tundra. They found nothing. No bodies, no tracks, no clues. But they did record something strange. During the investigation, several officers and local trappers reported seeing weird lights in the sky over the lake. Not the usual aurora, but something different. Pulses of brilliant blue light that seemed to dance with a mathematical precision, circling the empty village before vanishing into the stars. The locals whispered of the Wendigo, an ancient hunger that haunts the woods. Others talked of sky people who descend in chariots of fire. The police files remained open for years, but eventually they were tucked away in a drawer, labeled as an unsolved anomaly. But you don't just lose 2,000 people. They don't just evaporate like mist in the morning sun. It's been decades now. I'm an old man, sitting by a fire that I never let go out, but I never truly left Lake Anjakuni. Part of me is still standing in that frozen hut, looking at that unfinished parka and that cold pot of stew. Science has no answer for what happened that night in 1930. History has tried its best to forget it, to write it off as a tall tale told by a lonely trapper. But the North remembers. Sometimes, when the winter wind blows just right across the ice, and the house gets too quiet, I can still hear them. I hear the scratch of a needle that will never finish its stitch. I hear the whimper of dogs that waited for masters who never came home. And if I close my eyes, I can hear 2,000 voices, screaming in the silence of the snow. Some secrets are buried too deep in the ice to ever be found. And maybe, for our own sanity, that's exactly where they should stay.